Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Today we're going to be exploring the creation of the atomic bomb.
Oh, wow. That's a big one.
Yeah, it is. It's a story that, kind of takes us from, those early physics labs in like the early 20th century
Hmm.
all the way to that, that searing heat of the New Mexico desert,
Right.
where the world first witnessed that power of atomic energy.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it really all started, with really basic science,
Yeah.
trying to figure out like what an atom even is.
Right.
And it shows how these monumental events, like we all know about the atomic bomb,
Right.
but they often have their roots in these like quiet, almost, scientific discoveries.
Exactly, yeah. And speaking of discoveries, I keep seeing Ernest Rutherford's name pop up
Oh, yeah.
everywhere.
He's everywhere.
In all our sources.
Mhm.
Didn't he kind of revolutionize the way we understand the structure of the atom?
We did. Yeah, in the early 1900s, he totally changed our picture of the atom. So before Rutherford, scientists thought that atoms were like these solid little units.
Okay.
You couldn't break them apart. You couldn't, they were just these tiny solid things.
Uh-huh.
But in 1911, he did this famous experiment called the gold foil experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, he shot these tiny particles at a thin sheet of gold foil.
Mm-hmm.
And he found that most of the particles just went straight through.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But some of them bounced back at these like crazy angles.
Interesting.
So this told him that atoms were mostly empty space
Okay.
with a tiny dense nucleus at the center.
It's like a miniature solar system, kind of.
That's the analogy he used. Yeah.
Yeah.
The nucleus is like the sun and the electrons are like the planets orbiting around it.
Gotcha.
But he also achieved the first artificial transmutation of an element
Wow.
in 1919.
So what does that mean, transmutation?
So he basically changed nitrogen into oxygen
Really?
by like rearranging the particles in the nucleus.
How is that even possible if it's mostly empty space?
Well, so at the time they knew about protons,
Right.
which are positively charged, and electrons, which are negatively charged.
Right.
But there was this problem they couldn't quite figure out.
Okay.
They had these atoms of the same element, but they had different weights.
Okay.
And they called these isotopes.
Oh, isotopes.
Yeah, and this kind of suggested that there was something else in the nucleus besides the protons.
Okay, so this is where the neutron comes in, right?
Exactly. So in 1932, James Chadwick, another British physicist, finally discovered the neutron.
Okay.
And the key thing about the neutron is that it doesn't have any electrical charge.
Right.
So it can just kind of slip past those positively charged protons in the nucleus
Okay.
and interact with it directly.
So they've got this new tool, basically, to probe the atom.
Exactly. And so this opened up a whole new world for atomic research.
Okay.
Scientists like Enrico Fermi in Italy started bombarding atoms with neutrons.
Okay.
And they started creating all these new radioactive elements.
Wow. So was anyone at this point thinking like, hey, we can make a bomb out of this?
Well, it's funny, Rutherford himself, all this groundbreaking work he was doing, he actually dismissed the idea.
He did.
Yeah, he was like, no, that's moonshine. That's not going to happen.
Really?
Yeah, he thought it was impractical.
Wow.
But then just a couple years later, two of his students, John Cockcroft and Ernest Walton, they actually split an atom for the first time
Wow.
in 1932. They used a particle accelerator to smash these lithium atoms together
Yeah.
and transform them into helium.
So they proved him wrong.
Exactly. They show that you could actually split the atom.
Okay, so splitting the atom, but how did they figure out how much energy was in there?
Right. So that took another breakthrough. And this one happened kind of by accident.
Okay.
In 1938, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann in Berlin, they were bombarding uranium with neutrons.
Mm-hmm.
And they were getting these weird results. It seemed like the uranium atoms were breaking apart into lighter elements.
Okay.
And they were like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Right. We don't understand what's going on here.
So it wasn't just the lighter elements, though, right?
Right. So they didn't realize it at the time.
Okay.
But they had stumbled upon nuclear fission,
Okay.
this process of splitting a heavy atom into lighter ones.
And releasing a ton of energy.
And releasing a tremendous amount of energy.
Yeah.
And it was actually Lise Meitner and Otto Frisch
Okay.
who really figured out what was going on.
Okay.
So Meitner and Frisch were refugees from Nazi Germany,
Okay.
and they were working together in Sweden.
Okay.
When Hahn wrote to Meitner about his results, she immediately saw the implications.
Wow.
And working with her nephew Frisch, they calculated the energy released during uranium fission
Okay.
and confirmed that it was in line with Einstein's famous equation E mc Hort.
So now we have this discovery, right? We can split the atom And there's a huge amount of energy released.
Exactly.
And then this is where the chain reaction comes in, I think.
Right.
Can you explain how that works?
So a chain reaction is what makes an atomic bomb possible.
Okay.
When a uranium atom is split, it not only releases energy, but it also releases these additional neutrons.
Okay.
And these neutrons can then go on to hit other uranium atoms, causing them to split as well.
Okay.
So this creates this self-sustaining reaction that can release this tremendous amount of energy very quickly.
So like a domino effect.
Yeah, like a domino effect, but on an atomic scale.
Right.
With much higher stakes.
It's kind of mind-boggling to think about, like, how much power is in just one atom,
Right.
let alone millions or billions of them all going off at the same time.
Yeah, and so scientists quickly realized that this had the potential to be either an energy source
Right.
or a devastating weapon.
Right.
But they also realized that there are these major hurdles to overcome.
Okay.
So it turned out that not all uranium isotopes were equally susceptible to fission.
Oh, okay.
The rare uranium-235 isotope was the key to achieving a chain reaction. The challenge was, how do you separate enough of this rare isotope from the much more common uranium-238?
It sounds like a huge chemistry problem.
It was a massive challenge, yeah.
So where were the American scientists in all of this? Were they working on this too?
Oh, yeah, American physicists were definitely in the game.
Okay.
So Ernest Lawrence, a brilliant and ambitious scientist at UC Berkeley,
Okay.
he was a key figure. He developed this device called the cyclotron,
Okay.
which was essentially a particle accelerator
Okay.
that could smash atoms together at high speeds.
Okay.
This allowed him and his team to create new elements like neptunium and plutonium,
Wow.
which would become crucial later on.
Okay, so even before the war,
Mhm.
American scientists were making some real progress.
Absolutely.
But I'm guessing when World War II broke out, that really kicked things into high gear.
Yeah, it did. The fear that Nazi Germany might be pursuing an atomic bomb
Right.
really accelerated things.
I read that a British report, the MAU committee report, really kind of convinced the U.S. to get serious about it.
Yeah, that report was a game changer.
Okay.
The British scientists concluded that an atomic bomb was not only feasible,
Wow.
but could be built within a few years.
Wow.
And that really got the attention of American leaders,
Yeah.
people like Vannevar Bush and James Conant.
So the Manhattan Project is born, right?
Exactly.
This wasn't just like a regular research project.
No, this was massive top secret.
Right.
I mean, they brought together some of the brightest minds in the country,
Yeah.
not just physicists, but chemists, engineers, mathematicians, you name it,
Right.
all working under incredible pressure and secrecy.
Right.
And their goal was to harness the power of the atom and build a bomb before the Nazis did.
Wow. It looks like they explored 4 main approaches
Yeah.
to create enough fissile material for a bomb.
Right.
Electromagnetic separation, gaseous diffusion, centrifuges, and plutonium production.
Yeah.
Let's start with electromagnetic separation. What's that all about?
So electromagnetic separation, that was spearheaded by Ernest Lawrence. His idea was to use powerful magnets to separate the different isotopes of uranium
Okay.
based on their slightly different masses.
Okay.
This led to the construction of this massive facility at Oak Ridge, Tennessee,
Okay.
called Y-12,
Y-12.
which housed hundreds of these things called calutrons.
Calutrons. What are those?
They were essentially giant mass spectrometers.
Okay.
They used magnets to separate the isotopes.
Okay.
It required a huge amount of energy to operate.
Yeah, I bet.
But they believed it was the best way to get the enriched uranium they needed.
So that's Y-12 in Tennessee working on the uranium.
Right.
What about gaseous diffusion? How'd that work?
So gaseous diffusion was based on a different principle.
Okay.
The idea is that lighter molecules will pass through a porous barrier faster than heavier ones.
Okay.
So they converted uranium into uranium hexafluoride gas,
Okay.
which is very corrosive and dangerous stuff,
Right.
and then pumped it through these barriers repeatedly. And with each pass, the concentration of uranium-235 would slightly increase.
Okay, so it sounds pretty complicated.
It was incredibly complex.
Yeah.
They had to develop special porous materials
Okay.
that could withstand the gas
Right.
and build these huge plants to house the process.
Wow.
They built the K-25 plant also at Oak Ridge,
Okay.
and it was one of the largest buildings in the world at the time.
Wow.
This thing was a mile long and as high as a 10-story building, all dedicated to separating isotopes.
That's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got electromagnetic separation, gaseous diffusion. Those both sound like huge projects.
That's huge.
What about centrifuges?
So centrifuges rely on centrifugal force to separate the isotopes.
Okay.
They spin the gas at incredibly high speeds.
Okay.
And the heavier uranium-238 tends to move to the outside,
Right.
while the lighter uranium-235 stays closer to the center.
That makes sense.
So in theory, it would be less energy intensive,
Right.
but the technology was still in its early stages. Okay.
They couldn't build centrifuges that were reliable enough
Okay.
at the speeds needed to achieve separation.
Gotcha.
So they eventually decided to focus on the other methods
Okay.
for the time being.
So that leaves plutonium production.
Right.
Plutonium doesn't exist in nature.
It doesn't.
So how are they going to get enough of it to make a bomb?
So that was another one of the incredible feats of the Manhattan Project.
Okay.
They realized they could create plutonium in a nuclear reactor,
Okay.
which they called a pile at the time.
Okay.
And so the challenge of building the first nuclear reactor,
Right, because no one had ever done that before.
no one had ever done it before.
So who figured that out?
That fell to Enrico Fermi,
Okay.
who was already like a world-renowned physicist at this point.
Right.
He led a team at the University of Chicago to construct the first experimental nuclear reactor
Okay.
called Chicago Pile 1.
Chicago Pile 1
And get this, it was built under the stands of a football stadium.
at the university.
No way.
Yeah.
So what happened? Did it work?
It did. In December of 1942,
Wow.
they achieved a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction for the first time.
Wow.
So this was a pivotal moment. It proved that they could create plutonium on a large scale.
Okay, so now they can make plutonium,
Right.
but I'm guessing getting it out of the reactor is another problem.
You're exactly right. Plutonium is created within the reactor, but then it has to be chemically separated
Right.
from all the other materials in the reactor.
Right.
And that's a very complex and dangerous process
Yeah.
because plutonium is highly radioactive.
So where did they end up building these big plutonium production reactors?
So they chose Hanford, Washington,
Okay.
which was this remote location,
Okay.
with access to the Columbia River for cooling.
Okay.
The Hanford Engineer Works became this sprawling complex
Okay.
of reactors and processing plants, all dedicated to producing the plutonium for the bomb.
Okay, so we've got Oak Ridge in Tennessee working on the uranium, Hanford in Washington making the plutonium.
Right.
But all this material's useless if you don't have a bomb to put it in.
Exactly. And that brings us to Los Alamos.
Los Alamos,
Yeah.
the birthplace of the atomic bomb.
Right.
This is like something out of a spy thriller.
It really is.
All these brilliant scientists in the New Mexico desert.
Yeah, working on this top secret project.
Yeah.
It was a truly unique place.
Yeah.
This melting pot of scientific talent.
Right?
Physicists, chemists, mathematicians, engineers,
Wow.
all working together under incredible pressure.
Yeah.
And secrecy.
Yeah.
And at the head of it all was J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Okay.
A brilliant but very complex physicist
Okay.
who was handpicked to lead this effort.
So Oppenheimer's in charge at Los Alamos.
Right.
What were the biggest challenges they faced there?
Oh, there were so many.
Yeah.
Both theoretical and practical, they
Yeah.
had to figure out how to achieve critical mass, how to initiate the chain reaction with enough force to create an explosion,
Right.
how to keep it from pre-detonating,
Right.
how to deliver it to a target.
So basically every step of the way was a potential deal breaker.
It was. And all of this under extreme time pressure.
Right.
They were racing against time,
Yeah.
believing that the fate of the world might depend on their success.
Wow. It looks like they were exploring two main bomb designs,
Yeah.
the gun type and the implosion method.
Right.
What's the difference?
So the gun-type bomb was conceptually simpler.
Okay.
It basically involved firing one subcritical mass of uranium into another,
Okay.
creating a supercritical mass
Okay.
that would trigger the chain reaction.
So like a super high-tech cannon.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Wow.
They were actually confident enough in this design that they didn't even test it
They didn't.
before using it.
Wow.
That was the design they used for the uranium bomb nicknamed Little Boy.
Wow. Okay, so what about the implosion method? Why did they need that for the plutonium bomb?
So plutonium was much trickier to work with.
Okay.
The gun-type method wouldn't work reliably with plutonium because of the risk of pre-detonation.
Okay.
So they had to develop a much more sophisticated design.
So how did the implosion method work?
It involved surrounding the plutonium core with explosives,
Okay.
arranged in a very precise pattern.
Okay.
These explosives would detonate simultaneously,
Okay.
creating this perfectly symmetrical inward shock wave.
Okay.
that would compress the plutonium, forcing it to become supercritical
Wow.
and trigger the chain reaction.
That sounds really complicated.
It was one of the most challenging engineering feats of the war.
Wow.
They had to develop new types of explosives,
Okay.
precision detonators,
Ugh.
create this perfectly spherical implosion wave.
So two very different bomb designs, one for uranium, one for plutonium.
Right,
All this research happening at Los Alamos under Oppenheimer.
right,
But what comes next?
right. They can't just build them in the lab.
Right.
So the next step was to test the plutonium bomb.
Okay.
And that brings us to the Trinity test.
Trinity, the first detonation of an atomic bomb. I think we're going to have to pick that up in part 2.
Yeah, that's a story for next time.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back soon with part 2 of our deep dive into the creation of the atomic bomb.
See you then.
So we left off with the Manhattan Project, about to test the first plutonium bomb.
Yeah, the Trinity test.
It's hard to imagine, like, what that must have felt like.
It's incredible. You know, all that work, all those years leading up to that moment.
Yeah.
It must have been just an incredible mix of, you know, anticipation and
Right.
apprehension, I mean.
Right.
They were about to unleash this force of nature
Right.
that could change the world.
It's really amazing to think that it all started with, these little experiments with atoms.
It really is. It just shows you the unpredictable nature of scientific discovery. I mean, Rutherford himself probably never imagined that his work would lead to something like this.
I remember reading about his skepticism, too.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't he call it moonshine?
He did. He said something like, the energy produced by the breaking down of the atom is a very poor kind of thing. Anyone who expects a source of power from the transformation of these atoms is talking moonshine.
So he kind of saw the potential, but
Yeah.
didn't think it was practical.
Right. And then you have Cockcroft and Walton,
Right.
a couple of years later,
Yeah.
actually splitting the atom.
Yeah. Proving him wrong.
Exactly. It's amazing how quickly things progressed.
Yeah, it is. And then you have the discovery of fission
Oh, yeah.
by Hahn and Strassman.
Almost by accident.
Yeah. It seems like so much of this story is about those accidental discoveries.
It is this mix of, brilliance
Right.
and just pure luck.
Yeah. So back to the Trinity test.
Mhm.
Where did this all take place?
So they chose this remote spot in the Jornada del Muerto Desert,
Okay.
about 210 miles south of Los Alamos. It was really desolate.
Yeah.
They wanted it to be isolated and secret.
So like a scene out of a movie, right?
Totally.
Scientists in bunkers, miles away.
Yeah, they built this 100-foot-tall steel tower,
Okay.
and they hoisted the plutonium bomb to the top.
Okay.
They called it the Gadget.
It's a gadget, though.
And they had these observation bunkers set up at various distances
Yeah.
with all these instruments to measure the blast.
It must have been so tense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what was going to happen.
Right.
Some scientists thought they might ignite the atmosphere.
Really?
Yeah, like start this chain reaction
Wow.
that would consume the whole planet.
And others were worried about the radiation.
Yeah, the fallout.
Yeah.
Nobody knew how far it would spread.
So they had no idea really what to expect.
They had calculations, but nobody had ever seen an atomic explosion before.
Right.
They didn't know how big the blast would be,
Right.
how much radiation there would be. It was all a big unknown.
So July 16th, 1945, 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
The countdown reaches 0. What happens?
Well, the world changes. The
Yeah.
bomb explodes.
Yeah.
I mean, words can't describe it.
Yeah.
This flash brighter than 1,000 suns,
Wow.
visible for hundreds of miles.
Wow.
This shockwave that just races across the desert,
Yeah.
shattering windows miles away.
And the mushroom cloud.
Yeah, this massive mushroom cloud,
Yeah.
vaporized debris, radioactive material,
Right.
rising tens of thousands of feet into the air.
What was the reaction of the people who saw it?
I mean, you can read their accounts. It
Yeah.
was just awe.
Yeah. Yeah.
General Groves said it was beautiful and terrifying.
What about Oppenheimer?
Oh, Oppenheimer later said that at that moment, a verse from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, came to mind.
Okay.
He said, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Wow, that's powerful.
It really shows you how much he understood the gravity of what they had done.
It's like a turning point in human history.
Yes.
We entered a new era.
Yeah, the atomic age
Yeah.
with all its potential and danger.
So they tested the bomb successfully.
Right.
What happened next? Did they immediately start planning to use it?
Well, it was complicated.
Yeah.
The war in Europe was over,
Right.
but Japan was still fighting.
Right.
Truman, the new president, had to make this decision,
Right.
whether to use this new weapon
Yeah.
to try to force Japan's surrender.
So he had to weigh the benefits of ending the war
Right.
against the cost of using this weapon.
Exactly.
What were the main factors they considered?
Well, the military thought that a traditional invasion of Japan
Right.
would be incredibly costly.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands, maybe
Right.
millions of casualties.
Wow.
They argued that the bomb could save lives by ending the war quickly.
But there must have been arguments against using it, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Some people wanted to demonstrate it first,
Okay.
maybe on an uninhabited island,
Right.
to show Japan its power without actually killing anyone.
Right.
Others thought they should just keep bombing conventionally
Yeah.
and use a naval blockade.
Right.
They believed Japan would surrender eventually.
So Truman had this impossible choice.
A real moral dilemma.
Yeah.
It was a decision that would stay with him
Right.
for the rest of his life.
And one that people still debate today.
Absolutely.
So what did he decide?
He decided to authorize the use of the atomic bomb.
And that led to Hiroshima and Nagasaki
Right.
and the beginning of the atomic age.
Yeah.
I think we should talk more about what happened next
Yeah,
in part 3.
definitely.
Okay, so Truman's made the decision to use the bomb.
Right. A decision that would change the world forever.
So how do they actually choose the targets?
Well, they formed a target selection committee.
Okay.
Military officials, scientists, advisors. They had to consider all sorts of things.
Yeah.
The military significance of the target,
Yeah.
its industrial capacity,
Okay.
the size, the layout,
Right.
even the weather.
Wow. So they're trying to balance, the strategic goals
Right.
with, trying to minimize civilian casualties.
It was a tough job, no doubt.
Yeah, I bet. I read that Kyoto was on the list at first.
It was.
Japan's ancient capital.
Right. A major cultural center.
Right.
But fortunately, Secretary of War Stimson,
Okay.
he'd visited Kyoto before the war,
Okay.
and he knew how important it was.
Okay.
He intervened and got it removed from the list.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So what about Hiroshima? Why did they choose that?
Well, Hiroshima was a major port city
Okay.
and a military center,
Okay.
and it hadn't been bombed much yet.
Okay.
So they thought they could really see the effects of the bomb.
So they wanted to make a statement, basically.
Yeah.
Sure.
Show the world what this weapon could do.
So August 6th, 1945, the Enola Gay takes off
Right.
with a little boy.
The uranium bomb.
Yeah, and it detonates over Hiroshima.
8:15 a.m. local time.
What happens?
Total devastation. I mean, the bomb was equivalent to about 15,000 tons of TNT.
Wow.
Everything within a mile was just vaporized.
Wow.
Buildings collapsed. The ground was scorched.
And the people.
Tens of thousands died instantly.
And then there was the radiation.
Right. The long-term effects.
Yeah.
Radiation sickness, cancers.
It's hard to even imagine.
A terrible tragedy.
And Japan didn't surrender right away.
No, some in the government still wanted to fight.
Okay.
They were hoping to negotiate a better peace.
So 3 days later, Nagasaki.
Yeah, August 9th,
Boxcar.
carrying Fat Man, the plutonium bomb.
Right.
They were supposed to bomb Kokura,
Okay.
but there was too much cloud cover.
Okay.
So they diverted to Nagasaki.
Another city destroyed.
I mean, Nagasaki was surrounded by hills,
Okay.
so the blast was actually contained somewhat,
Okay.
but it was still horrific.
Tens of thousands dead, more injured.
Yeah.
And this time, Japan surrendered,
They did on August 15th. Emperor Hirohito announced the surrender.
ending World War II,
Right.
but at a terrible cost.
Absolutely. The atomic bombings were a turning point in history.
Yeah.
They forced us to confront the power we now possess.
It's hard to wrap your head around it all.
It really is.
I mean, what are the biggest takeaways from this story?
Well, I think it shows how science and politics are intertwined,
Yeah.
how technology can have unintended consequences,
Right.
and how important it is to find peaceful solutions.
It makes you think about the choices we make
It does.
and the impact they have on the world.
Yeah, the story is still relevant today.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It's a story that really makes you think
It does.
about the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive.
See you then.